She thought the worst thing a person could do was lie to your face. She was wrong. The worst thing is when they do it while holding your hand, looking you in the eyes, saying I love you, and meaning none of it. Vivian Hartwell was 14 days away from the wedding she had spent 3 years building toward. Then her little sister walked through her front door and destroyed everything in under 4 minutes. What followed wasn't heartbreak. It was demolition. This is the story of a woman who lost everything and walked straight into the arms of the most dangerous man in Seoul. If this story finds you tonight, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this has traveled. Follow along to the very end. You won't want to miss what's coming. Plus, the cherry blossoms were her idea. Vivian had spent 3 weeks convincing the florist that cherry blossoms in late October were not only possible but necessary, that the entire aesthetic of the wedding depended on that specific softness, that particular shade of pale pink against the white stone of the Hartwell family chapel. She had drawn it out on drafting paper at 2 in the morning, the way she drew everything that mattered to her, pencil moving in long, careful strokes, until the image in her head became something real and visible in hers. That was who Vivian was. She built things. She made the invisible tangible. She took empty space and filled it with structure and intention and beauty. It never occurred to her that the same skill made her blind to what was already broken. The apartment was quiet when she got home that Thursday evening. Quiet in the particular way of a space that had been recently disturbed. A chair slightly out of place, a jacket on the hook that shouldn't have been there yet. The faint smell of a perfume that wasn't hers hanging in the air like a question. She registered all of it, filed it under nothing, because she was tired, because the meeting with the venue coordinator had run 2 hours long, because she had 17 messages from the caterer, and a sourcing issue with the table linens, and exactly 14 days left before she would stand in front of everyone she had ever loved and say words she had been rehearsing in her sleep. She dropped her bag on the kitchen counter, filled a glass of water, drank half of it standing at the sink, looking out at the gray London sky going dark over the rooftops. That was when she heard footsteps in the hallway, not Daniel's footsteps. She knew the sound of Daniel moving through a room, the particular weight of him, the slight shuffle of his left foot, the way he always paused outside the kitchen door like he was checking whether she was in a mood. These steps were lighter, hesitant, the steps of someone who wasn't sure they had the right to be there. Vivian turned around. Her sister was standing in the kitchen doorway. Sabrina Hartwell was 26 years old, 4 years younger than Vivian, and in most rooms she was the one people looked at first. Not because she was louder or more beautiful in any objective sense, but because she had always had that particular quality of needing to be noticed. An energy that radiated outward, drawing attention the way a lit match drew eyes in a dark room. Vivian had spent most of their childhood watching that happen and feeling neither jealous nor resentful, just quietly aware of the difference between them. Sabrina needed the room. Vivian needed the work. But Sabrina, standing in that doorway, looked nothing like herself. She looked like someone who had rehearsed a speech 10,000 times and forgotten every word the moment she walked on stage. Her face was gray beneath her makeup. Her hands were pressed flat against her thighs. Her eyes, her mother's eyes, the same dark hazel Vivian had inherited, were wet in a way that hadn't spilled yet, the way water sits at the edge of a glass when someone has filled it too full. Viv, she said, just that, just her name. The way people say a name when they don't know where else to start. Vivian set down this water glass. Something cold moved through her chest. Not panic, not yet, just the quiet recognition that whatever came next was going to be bad. She had a gift for structure. She understood load-bearing walls, the points where pressure concentrated, the places where a building was most likely to fail. She had always applied that same instinct to her life, quietly cataloging the places where things could go wrong. She thought she'd accounted for all of them. "What are you doing here?" Vivian asked. Her voice came out even. She was good at even. "Daniel doesn't get back from Edinburgh until tomorrow." Sabrina's mouth moved. Nothing came out for a moment. "I know," she said finally. This cold thing in Vivian's chest spread. "Sabrina." She kept her voice level because that was the only way she knew how to hold herself together when she felt the ground shifting. "What happened?" Sabrina looked at the floor, then at the wall, then at her own hands, pressed flat against her thighs. "I've been trying to tell you for weeks," she said. "I kept starting and then I couldn't. I thought maybe it would just—" She stopped, swallowed. "I'm pregnant." The kitchen was silent. Outside, somewhere over the city, thunder moved through the clouds. The window glass trembled, just slightly, the way glass does when something heavy passes close. Okay, Vivian said. The word was automatic. Okay. And who's... She stopped. Because she already knew. She knew the way you know the answer to a question you've been refusing to ask for a long time. Not because someone told you, but because some part of you had been watching the edges of things, cataloging the small wrongnesses, the slightly off-angle details, the load-bearing walls that weren't quite holding. You know the way a building knows before the crack appears, in the vibration, in the settling, in the barely perceptible shift of weight. She knew. Sabrina finally looked up. Her eyes were spilling now, silent tears running straight down her face, and even in that moment, Vivian noticed with the cold, detached part of her brain that her sister cried beautifully, without ugliness, without the red swollen face and ragged breathing that crying usually produced. Even falling apart, Sabrina was watchable. "I'm so sorry," Sabrina whispered. It only happened twice, and I know that doesn't make it. I know that's not." "How long?" Vivian asked. "What? How long has it been going on?" It wasn't a question. Questions implied she was waiting for an answer she didn't already have. This was something else. The demand for a number, a timeline, a concrete piece of information she could hold in her hand and look at without flinching. Sabrina closed her eyes. 8 months. 8 months. 8 months ago, Vivian had been designing the expansion of a cultural center in Manchester, working 60-hour weeks, barely sleeping, barely eating, calling Daniel every night from the drafting room because she missed the sound of his voice. 8 months ago, she had been in love the way she had always been in love. Quietly, completely, with the same total commitment she brought to everything she built. No performance, no conditions, just the real thing, which she had always believed was the strongest thing. 8 months. She became aware that her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the counter, the way Sabrina had pressed her hands against her thighs. And the symmetry of that gesture sent something through her that was almost funny, almost unbearable. "Get out," Vivian said. "Viv, I need you to get out of my apartment." Still even, still controlled, the voice of a woman standing on top of something that was collapsing and refusing to move. "Right now, Sabrina, please." Sabrina took a step forward. "I can't just... I need you to understand that I didn't... I understand exactly what you did." The control slipped, just for a second. A hairline fracture, a crack too fine to see unless you knew what to look for. "I understand every single thing you did. I need you to not be in my apartment right now." Sabrina left. The front door closed. Vivian stood in the kitchen for a long time, hands flat on the counter, not moving, not thinking, just breathing in the shallow, careful way of someone who has just taken a blow and hasn't fully registered the damage yet. The thunder rolled again, closer now. The first rain hit the windows. Big drops, heavy and cold, streaking down the glass like something being erased. Then she walked into the bedroom. The wedding dress was hanging on the back of the wardrobe door. She had picked it up from the final fitting 3 days ago, and it had been hanging there ever since in its garment bag, this pale, beautiful, immovable fact of her future. She had never been a woman who dreamed about wedding dresses. That had always been Sabrina's territory. The bridal magazines left open on the coffee table, the opinions about lace versus silk, the detailed fantasies about a perfect day. Vivian had chosen this dress because it was elegant and well-constructed, and because when she had stood in front of the mirror in the boutique fitting room, she had thought, this is a dress for someone who knows what she wants. She unzipped the garment bag, stood looking at the dress for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen, opened the drawer beside the stove, and took out the scissors she used to cut herbs. She didn't think about it. That was the thing she would remember afterward, and for a long time she wouldn't know whether to be proud of that or disturbed by it. She didn't think. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She walked back into the bedroom, took the dress off the hook, laid it on the bed with careful hands, and began to cut. It took a long time. The fabric was dense, expensive, resistant. She had to use both hands, had to put her full weight behind the scissors, and by the end her palms were raw and her shoulders ached. And there were pieces of pale silk scattered across the duvet like something that had been shed, like something that had stopped being necessary. She sat down on the floor with her back against the bed, surrounded by the remnants of the dress she had planned to wear in 14 days, and she looked at her hands, still not crying, still not feeling whatever it was she was supposed to feel. Just empty. The particular emptiness of a building after a demolition before the clearing crew comes. The silence of something that used to stand. Her phone buzzed on the bed above her. She reached up and took it without looking, already knowing. Daniel's name was on the screen. Calling from Edinburgh, where he wasn't supposed to be alone, she understood now. Where he had never been alone. 14 months of business trips, of I'll be back Sunday, of falling asleep on the phone together, and she had built a picture in her head of what those hours looked like. Daniel in a hotel room, a conference table, a client dinner. And all of it had been a different architecture entirely, a building she had never been shown the blueprints to. She stared at his name on the screen until the call went to voicemail. Then she opened her contacts and booked a flight. Not to Edinburgh, not anywhere in England. She typed Seoul into the search bar because it was the first city that came into her head, the city she had visited once for a conference 4 years ago and barely seen, the city that had always existed at the far edge of her mental geography, as a place she might return to someday when there was time. She booked the first available seat, one way, departing Heathrow at 6 the following morning. She didn't pack much. A suitcase. Her drafting tools. Her laptop. She moved through the apartment with the methodical efficiency of someone who had already processed the decision and was simply executing it now, room by room, drawer by drawer, taking only what was structurally necessary, leaving behind everything ornamental. The engagement ring went on the kitchen counter. She set it down carefully, precisely, in the exact center of the granite surface, the way you place a final object in a space you're finished with. Then she called a cab. At 30 years old, Vivian Hartwell walked out of her London life on a rainy Thursday night with one suitcase, a carry-on, and the absolute certainty that she was never coming back. She was wrong about the last part, but she didn't know that yet. Seoul received her the way cities receive everyone who arrives broken, indifferently, enormously, with the particular mercy of a place that is too busy and too vast to notice one more small human disaster disappearing into its noise. She rented a room in Mapogu, a small, clean apartment on the 6th floor of a building that smelled like concrete and cooking oil and the faint chemical sharpness of cleaning products. She found a teaching position at a language institute within 3 weeks. Not architecture, not design, not anything she was trained for, but English conversation classes 6 hours a day, which required a different kind of precision, the precision of making yourself understood by people who were working hard to understand. She was good at it. She was good at most things she put her mind to, which had always been both a strength and a form of loneliness. 6 months passed. She did not contact Daniel. She did not contact Sabrina. Her mother called twice a month, and Vivian answered, keeping her voice steady, her answers brief, redirecting to neutral territory with the practiced ease of someone who has learned to conduct conversations across the perimeter of the real subject. She told herself this was handling it. She told herself she was fine. She told herself a lot of things in those 6 months. She ran every morning before dawn, alone, through streets that were already humming with the early industry of the city. Delivery trucks, street vendors setting up stalls, the distant clatter of a market opening. She ran because her body needed something to do with what her mind refused to process. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs went to nothing, and the only thing she could think about was the next step, and then the one after that. She did not draw. She did not draft. She did not look at architecture the way she used to look at it, as a living language she was always translating, always finding new ways to speak. She looked at buildings the way you look at a language you used to speak and have decided to stop. She was not, she would later understand, living. She was maintaining. There is a difference, and it matters. The rain started on a Friday afternoon in March. The particular Seoul spring rain that comes in cold and heavy off the mountains and turns the streets into long gray mirrors reflecting the neon of the signs above them. Vivian had been heading home from her last class of the day when it hit. Not the polite London drizzle she had grown up with, but a real downpour, the kind that soaks through a coat in 30 seconds and turns the world into a blur of water and light. She ducked into the nearest available door. It happened to be a museum. The Hanguk Modern Art Museum was a building she had walked past dozens of times and never entered. A low, clean structure of pale stone and glass. Elegant in the way that serious contemporary architecture tries to be elegant, which is to say, deliberately, with full awareness of its own restraint. She paid the admission fee at the front desk, shook the rain off her coat, and moved into the first gallery more to get out of the weather than out of any particular intention to look at art. But she looked. There was a room in the second gallery, a large room with very high ceilings and a single long window that looked out onto the museum's inner courtyard, where the rain was still coming down hard, turning the stone pavement silver. The room held 7 paintings, large canvases, oil on canvas, deeply textured surfaces that caught the low gallery lighting at different angles and gave back different things depending on where you stood. The work was dense and structural, almost architectural, not landscapes, not portraits, but arrangements of space and mass and shadow that made Vivian think, involuntarily, of the inside of a building she hadn't designed yet. She stood in front of the largest canvas for a long time. Her breathing slowed. Something in her shoulders unlocked that she hadn't realized she'd been holding tense. She had forgotten, in 6 months of maintaining, that space could do this to her. That the right arrangement of forms could reach past all her carefully constructed walls and touch something that wasn't defended, wasn't managed, wasn't performing fine. The artist calls it the weight of inhabiting, said a voice beside her. She turned. The man standing 3 feet to her left was looking at the painting, not at her. He was tall, taller than she expected, given the way he occupied the space around him, which was with a stillness so complete it made his height seem incidental. Korean, mid-30s, she would have guessed, with a face that was striking in a way that had less to do with conventional beauty and more to do with its composition. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, a mouth that looked like it hadn't found much use for smiling. He was wearing a dark coat, unremarkable in quality, except that quality like that is never unremarkable. It just pretends to be. His hands were at his sides. He was looking at the painting with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who does not need to perform being interested. Vivian turned back to the canvas. "That's an odd title," she said. She hadn't intended to say anything. He meant it literally. His English was perfect, not learned, not accented in the way of someone translating in real time, but the English of someone who had lived in it long enough for it to become a secondary instinct. The weight you feel inside a space, how some rooms hold you differently than others. "I know what he meant," she said. "I'm an architect." A beat. "Were," she corrected, before she understood why she was correcting herself. He looked at her then, for the first time. The directness of it was startling. Not rude, not intrusive, just completely without performance. The way a person looks at something when they are actually trying to understand it. "Were," he repeated. "Past tense," she said, and looked back at the painting. "It's nothing." He didn't push. He didn't pivot to a different topic with the conversational reflex of someone filling an awkward silence. He simply returned his attention to the canvas, and they stood there in the quiet of the gallery, the rain running down the long window in the far wall. And something about the ease of that, the absence of expectation in it, loosened something in Vivian's throat that she hadn't known was tight. "Are you here for the exhibition?" she asked. "I own the building," he said. She looked at him. "The museum," he clarified, with no particular inflection, as if this were a minor administrative detail. "Right," she said. "Kangjun-seo," he said. He didn't extend his hand, didn't adopt the posture of introduction. No shift in weight, no realignment toward her. Just his name, offered plainly, the way you offer a fact. "Vivian Hartwell," she said. He nodded. They looked at the painting for another minute in silence. "You said where," he said then. "Why?" "I told you. You said it's nothing. It's not nothing." He wasn't challenging her. His voice was flat and even, like someone reading coordinates from a map. "You said it, then corrected yourself, then dismissed it. Those aren't the movements of someone who thinks it's nothing." Vivian's jaw tightened. "Do you always analyze people you've just met?" "Yes," he said. She almost laughed. She hadn't laughed in a long time, and the impulse surprised her, arrived without warning from somewhere she thought she'd closed off. "I had a difficult year," she said. "I'm not practicing architecture here. I teach English." "Why Seoul?" "It was the first city that came up." A pause. "That's not a reason," he said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She turned and walked away from the painting toward the next gallery. She half expected him to follow, half expected him to not. He did neither immediately. And then, when she was already in the doorway of the next room, she heard his footsteps, unhurried, behind her. They moved through the rest of the exhibition without conversation, stopping at different points, occasionally arriving at the same canvas at the same time, and standing in the silence that had developed between them, which was not comfortable exactly, but was not uncomfortable either. It was the silence of two people who have established that neither of them is going to pretend. By the time they reached the final gallery, the rain had slowed to a gray drizzle. The light through the windows had gone soft and low. "I'll have someone bring a car around," Junso said. "I don't need—" "It's still raining." His tone wasn't solicitous. It was simply factual. "You have a coat that's still wet. The nearest subway is 12 minutes on foot. I'm going in the same direction." A slight pause. "Probably." Vivian looked at him. "You don't know what direction I'm going," she said. "No," he agreed. She almost said no. The reflex was there. The self-sufficiency that had calcified into something harder over the last 6 months. The habit of needing nothing from anyone, because needing things led to owing things, and owing things led to the particular vulnerability she had decided she was done with. But the coat was wet, and the rain was still coming, and something about this man's absolute refusal to be charming or solicitous, or anything other than what he appeared to be made, refusal seemed like the more artificial choice. "Fine," she said. The car was a black sedan, long and quiet, with a driver who said nothing. Junseo got in on one side, Vivienne on the other, and the city moved past the windows in the rain-blurred neon way it did at dusk, all color and reflection and the impression of movement without destinations. He asked for her address. She gave it. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. "You're wasted teaching English," he said. "You don't know my work." I know an architect when I talk to one. The way you look at structures, the language you used about the paintings." He was looking out the window, not at her. "You're not someone who stopped caring about buildings. You're someone who's punishing yourself by staying away from them." The words landed with an accuracy that made her breath catch. "That's a significant thing to say to someone you met 40 minutes ago," she said. "I'm told I'm significant," he said, and there was something so dry in it, so precisely calibrated to be almost but not quite a joke, that she felt the impulse to laugh again, and this time it made it further, a short, surprise sound, not quite a laugh, but the beginning of one. He looked at her then. Not the startled look of someone who caused an unexpected reaction, but the attentive look of someone filing new information. The car stopped in front of her building. "Thank you," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Miss Hartwell." His voice stopped her hand. She looked back. He was watching her with that same complete, unhurried attention. "How long are you planning to punish yourself?" She didn't answer. She got out of the car, walked into her building, and rode the elevator to the 6th floor with her wet coat and her wet shoes, and the particular unsteadiness of someone who has just been seen clearly by a stranger and doesn't know yet whether that's dangerous or necessary. She saw him again 8 days later, not by accident. He left a message for her at the Language Institute. She had no idea how he had her place of work, but the message was brief and direct, and she would later understand this was simply how he operated. He found out what he needed to know, without ceremony, without explanation, without asking permission. The message said only, "There is a project. If you're interested, come to this address Thursday at 6. It included an address in Gangnam. Vivian read it twice, threw it in the drawer of her desk, spent 3 days not thinking about it, and thinking about nothing else. She went on Thursday. The address was a building currently under renovation, a 6-story structure on a quiet street, stripped to its skeleton on the upper floors, the lower levels a controlled chaos of materials and equipment, and workers who fell silent when she and Junseo walked through. He handed her a set of drawings and didn't explain himself, just stood back and watched her look at them. They were bad drawings. Technically competent but architecturally timid. A renovation plan that missed the bones of the building entirely, that proposed to cover what was interesting about the existing structure with generic commercial surfaces, that treated the space as a container rather than an environment. "Who drew these?" she asked. "The firm I hired." "Why are you showing them to me?" "Because they're wrong," he said. She looked up at him. "The load-bearing wall on the 3rd floor," she said. "If they remove it the way this drawing proposes, I know. Then why?" "Because I want to know if you see it too," he said. She looked at the drawing again, then at the exposed structure around them. The old brick and steel, the good bones of a building that had been standing for 50 years and could stand for 50 more with the right intervention. Something moved in her chest, old and familiar and unwelcome. "I'm a teacher," she said. "You were an architect." He paused. "You could be again." She handed the drawings back to him. This isn't... You can't just... She stopped, looked at the building instead of at him. I don't have my registration here. I don't know the Korean building codes. I don't have the infrastructure for a project like... Those are logistics, he said. They're solvable. I'm not asking about logistics. Then what are you asking? He held the drawings without looking at them, his eyes on her face, that same clear, unflinching attention that she had not been able to stop thinking about for 8 days. I'm asking if you want to come back, he said. It was the simplest thing anyone had said to her in 6 months, maybe longer. Not are you okay? Not what happened. Not the careful, distant questions her mother asked twice a month in order to avoid the real conversation. Just, do you want to come back? As if it were that simple, as if she were the only relevant variable. She took a breath. I'd need to see the full structural survey, she said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Almost nothing. She was watching closely enough to catch it. I'll have it sent tonight, he said. She looked at the survey. She looked at it for 4 hours. At the kitchen table of her 6th-floor apartment, with coffee going cold beside her and her drafting pencils laid out in a row. Still in their case, still unused, the way she had carried them from London to Seoul like an obligation she wasn't ready to meet yet. She took the first pencil out at 11 o'clock that night. She didn't sleep. By 6 in the morning, she had 20 preliminary sketches laid out across the table in the kitchen floor. The first real architectural thinking she had done in 6 months, and her hands were smudged with graphite, and her coffee was stone cold, and she was breathing differently than she had in a long time. Faster, sharper, alive in the way you get when a problem is eating at your brain and you're eating back. She looked at the sketches. She thought about the building's bones, the existing structure, the story, the old brick told about the space it enclosed. She thought about Kang Jun-seo standing in a half-demolished building at 6 in the evening, handing her bad drawings and waiting to see if she knew they were bad. She thought about the way he had said come back, as if it were an instruction rather than an invitation, and as if he were confident enough in his own reading of her to make that distinction. It irritated her. It had been irritating her for 8 days. She called the number on the message. He picked up on the second ring. The staircase is in the wrong position, she said without preamble. A pause. Good morning, he said. The staircase is structurally in the wrong position, and the current plan compensates for it by taking load off the north wall in a way that destabilizes the entire 3rd floor. Moving it 4 meters west solves the structural problem and opens the 2nd floor plan in a way that actually uses the building's existing light. Another pause. Slightly longer. Are you available this morning? He said. I'm a teacher, she said. I have a class at 9. After. She looked at her sketches scattered across the floor. 20 drawings, 6 hours of work. Her hands still smudged with graphite. After, she agreed. That was how it started. Not with a conversation, not with a proposal, not with anything she could have described afterward as a decision. Exactly. More like a series of small movements in a direction, each one manageable on its own, each one leading to the next without announcing where they were going. She consulted on the building. He paid her a consulting fee that was substantially more than she quoted, without discussion, in the way of someone for whom the specific numbers are less important than the principle of paying correctly. She drafted plans. He reviewed them with the focused attention of someone who had taught himself enough architecture to know what he was looking at, which made him a difficult client in the best possible way, the kind who asks questions that force you to be precise. They worked together for 6 weeks. She learned, in fragments, who he was. Not from him. He offered very little about himself, and she had learned not to push, which was itself information about the kind of man he was. But from the texture of the world he moved through. The way security materialized around him in certain spaces without ceremony, the particular deference of people in rooms with him, the calls he took and the brevity with which he handled them, the way entire arrangements of a place would shift around his presence without him appearing to notice. She asked him once directly, "What is it you actually do?" They were standing on the third floor of the building, the new staircase framework going up around them, and he turned to look at her with the expression she had already started to recognize. Not surprised, not guarded, just weighing something. "Finance," he said. "That's not what I asked." A silence. "I run an organization," he said. "It has interests in finance, in property, in other things." "Other things," she repeated. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment, at the stillness of him, The absolute self-containment, the way he inhabited a space as if he owned it even when, as she had observed, he literally did. Okay, she said, and turned back to the framework. She filed what she knew alongside what she didn't know, and built a picture that was structurally sufficient without requiring her to examine its load-bearing walls too closely. She was an architect. She understood selective examination. She understood that some buildings were safe to occupy without knowing everything about how they'd been built. It was a lie she was telling herself. She knew it was a lie. She was good at those, too. The proposition came on a Tuesday evening, not in the building, not in the museum, in his office on the 34th floor of a glass tower in central Seoul, with the city laid out below them in the full neon sprawl of its evening self. Every light duplicated in the Han River that bent south through the center of it, like a dark answer to all that brightness. She had come to present the final plans. He reviewed them in silence, page by page, with the pencil he always used to mark his questions in the margin. Small, precise notations, nothing extraneous. When he finished, he set the drawings on the desk and looked at her. "There's something else I need to discuss," he said. "The timeline, not about the building." She waited. He stood, moved to the window, stood looking out at the city with his hands in his coat pockets. There was something different about him tonight, she registered. Not in his manner, which was as level and contained as ever, but in the specific quality of the stillness. Like a man who has made a decision and is now simply delivering it. "I'm expanding into international markets," he said. "Europe primarily. The people I deal with, the partnerships I need to secure, they require a particular kind of presentation. Legitimacy." He paused. "Stability." She said nothing. "Nothing. I need a wife," he said. Vivian's stillness matched his. "On paper," he continued, turning from the window to look at her directly. "A contract. 2 years. In return you would have financial security, access to resources, protection." A beat. "The support infrastructure to properly relaunch your career in Seoul." The silence stretched. "You're serious," she said. "I don't make jokes about contracts." She looked at him. At the flat evenness of his expression, the complete absence of charm or seduction or any of the apparatus men usually deployed when they wanted something. Just the proposition, stated plainly, the way you state a structural requirement. Here is what the building needs. Here is what it will cost. Here is what you get in return. "Why me?" she said. "Because you're intelligent and you're capable and you don't need anything from me except what I'm offering." He paused. "And because you are already not performing. You are simply you. That's rare." Another pause, the briefest. "Also because you will not fall in love with me." That landed somewhere she wasn't expecting. "You seem very confident about that," she said. "I'm confident about most things," he said. She looked out at the city, at the river, at the lights, at the vast, indifferent, merciful sprawl of Seoul that had received her 6 months ago and asked nothing from her and given her just enough to keep going. She thought about Daniel's name on her phone screen, the engagement ring on the granite counter, the pieces of the dress across the duvet. She thought about 8 months. She thought about the building's bones, the good structure underneath the bad drawings, the potential in a space that just needed someone to look at it correctly. She turned back to Junseo. "I'll need to read the contract," she said. "Obviously," he said. "All of it. Every clause." "I wouldn't expect otherwise." She nodded. Once. The small, definitive nod of a woman closing a calculation. "Send it tonight," she said. "It's already on your email," he said. She looked at him. "I told you," he said. "I'm confident about most things." She picked up the final plans from the desk, tucked them under her arm, and walked toward the door. "Miss Hartwell," he said. She stopped but didn't turn. "In 2 years," he said, "you will have everything you need to build whatever you want, wherever you want. No one will be able to touch you." She stood there for a moment with the city behind her through the glass and his voice level and flat in the air. 2 years, she said. 2 years, he confirmed. She walked out. She read the contract that night. All of it. Every clause, every subclause, every provision, the legal language cold and precise and exhaustive and completely honest in the way that very few things in her life had been recently. At 2 in the morning, she signed it. And in the morning, she woke up as someone's wife. A wife on paper, a wife in a tower, a wife to a man who had told her, with complete confidence, that she would never fall in love with him. What he didn't tell her, what neither of them knew yet, in the gray morning light of a Seoul March, the Han River running silver below the city, was that the contract had already started doing something neither of them had written into it, something neither of them had a clause for. And contracts, Vivienne knew, were only ever as good as the assumptions you made when you wrote them. The contract arrived in her inbox at 2:47 in the morning, which meant he had sent it before she even left the building. She read it at the kitchen table with the city quiet outside and a glass of water she kept forgetting to drink sitting beside her laptop. 41 pages. She read every one. The language was clean and surgical, the work of lawyers who had done this before, who knew how to make an arrangement like this airtight without making it feel like what it was. Separate residences within the same property. Joint public appearances at a frequency to be mutually agreed. Financial provisions laid out in tiers, each one contingent on specific milestones. A non-disclosure clause that ran in both directions with equal weight, which she noted because it was unusual, because it meant he was as exposed by this arrangement as she was, which either meant he trusted her judgment or he had already done enough research on her to know she wouldn't talk. Probably the second one. At the bottom of the last page, above the signature line, a single handwritten addition in a precise compressed script. All terms negotiable prior to execution. None after. She read that twice. Then she picked up the pen she used for drafting, the one with the good weight, the one that moved the way she thought, and signed her name in the space provided, Vivienne Hartwell. Clear, unhesitating, the signature of a woman who had made a decision and was not going to revisit it at 2 in the morning on a kitchen floor with graphite still on her hands. She scanned it, sent it back. Then she sat in the quiet for a while and looked at the city through the window and did not think about what she'd just done, because thinking about it was not useful, and she had always been a woman who prioritized the useful. She was getting better at lying to herself. She recognized that. She wasn't sure yet whether it was a survival skill or a character flaw. Possibly both. The move happened 4 days later with an efficiency that told her everything she needed to know about how Kang Junseo operated. A team of 3 arrived at her apartment Thursday morning. Not movers exactly, more like people who move things as a secondary function of their actual purpose, which appeared to be managing logistics in a general sense for a man who had a great many logistics that required managing. They were polite, quiet, and extremely fast. By noon, her suitcase and her drafting tools and her books and the small collection of objects she had accumulated in 6 months of surviving in Seoul were loaded into a vehicle she hadn't been told to expect. She gave the keys back to the building manager, who looked at her with the particular blankness of a man who has learned not to ask questions about the comings and goings of foreign women on the 6th floor. The new address was in Yongsan-gu, close to the river. The building was the kind of building that did not announce itself. No branded lobby, no ostentatious facade, just clean stone and good glass, and the quiet authority of serious money that has nothing to prove. She was shown to an apartment on the 18th floor. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that was better equipped than any kitchen she had ever used, and a wall of windows that faced west over the Han River and the mountains behind it. A separate set of keys, she was told, unlocked the floor above. The 32nd floor. Junseo's residence. "He asked me to tell you," said the man who had managed the logistics, a precise and unreadable person named Choi, who she would come to understand was Junseo's primary operational assistant, "that the 32nd floor is always accessible to you. He also asked me to tell you that it is never required." "Understood," she said. Choi left. She stood in the living room of her new apartment and looked at the river and thought about the word required and what it implied about the word accessible, and decided not to examine it further. She unpacked her drafting tools first. That told her something about herself that she was not ready to look at directly. They appeared together for the first time publicly 12 days after she signed the contract. A charity dinner in Gangnam, the kind of event that existed primarily to be seen at, where the food was secondary to the architecture of social positioning that happened in the spaces between courses. Junseo had sent a car and a message, business formal. Nothing that requires assistance to walk in. She had almost smiled at that. She wore a dress she had bought in London 2 years ago for an awards reception. Dark green silk, clean lines, nothing decorative except the cut, which was the most honest kind of decoration. She was not a woman who needed ornamentation. She had always understood that. He was waiting in the lobby when she came down. He looked at her the way he looked at buildings. A single, complete assessment, nothing lingering, just information gathered and filed. Good, he said. I wasn't asking for your approval, she said. I know, he said. Good anyway. In the car, he briefed her. Which families would be present, which names she needed to recognize, which conversations she should engage and which she should let him manage. He spoke quickly and without condescension. The way you brief someone, you expect to be competent. And if someone asks how we met, she said. The museum, he said, which is true. And the timeline? We've been together for 8 months. Quietly. He paused. Also plausible. She looked out the window. 8 months. The same number Sabrina had said, standing in the kitchen doorway with wet eyes. She hadn't noticed that until now, and the coincidence landed in her chest with a dull, unpleasant weight she immediately buried. If anyone gets specific, she said. They won't, he said. People don't ask direct questions about things they're afraid to know the answers to. She looked at him. In my experience, he added, which was the closest he ever came to a qualifier. The dinner was exactly what she expected and nothing she was unprepared for. She had attended enough professional events in her London years to know how to move through a room like this, how to listen more than she spoke, how to ask questions that gave the other person the impression of being deeply interesting, how to maintain a posture that communicated confidence without competition. She was good at this kind of performance. She had just never performed it beside someone before. Junseo was a revelation to watch. Not because he was charming. He wasn't, not in any conventional sense. He didn't tell stories, didn't flatter, didn't deploy any of the usual social weapons of powerful men at expensive dinners. He was simply, completely present, the quality of his attention so total that the people he spoke with seemed to grow slightly larger in its beam, as if being fully observed were itself a form of recognition they hadn't known they needed. She watched a senior executive from a major Korean conglomerate visibly restructure his pitch mid-sentence under the weight of Junseo's attentiveness. She watched 2 women from different social orbits both orient toward him simultaneously without appearing to notice they were doing it. How was, she thought, the human equivalent of a very well-designed room. Not beautiful exactly, just structurally correct. Everything in the right relationship to everything else. At one point, across the width of a conversation she was having with the wife of a government minister, she felt his hand settle at the small of her back. Light, brief. Gone within 3 seconds, probably before anyone who hadn't been paying attention would have registered it. But her spine registered it. Her whole nervous system registered it. The way a building registers a change in load. Not with collapse, but with adjustment, the subtle redistribution of weight. She finished her sentence without missing a beat. On the ride back, she said nothing about it. Neither did he. The routine settled in the weeks that followed, the way routines do. Not through decision, but through repetition. One day layering over another until a pattern existed that neither of them had explicitly designed. She worked on the building renovation 3 days a week, sometimes 4. He reviewed her progress on the other days, quickly, with the same precise marginalia and occasionally a question that required her to go back and rethink a section she thought she'd resolved. They attended 2 more public events. They passed each other in the lobby of the building occasionally, with the slightly careful neutrality of people who share a space and have agreed, without discussing it, on the terms of that sharing. She did not go to the 32nd floor. She did not need to. She told herself this often enough that it started to feel true. The things she had not anticipated, the thing she had not written into her own private understanding of what this arrangement was the work. Not the renovation work, which she had anticipated and which was simply the return of herself to herself. That specific deep hum of a brain doing the thing it was built to do. What she hadn't anticipated was what it felt like to do that work and have it witnessed by someone who was paying full attention. He asked her once, standing on the 3rd floor of the building with the new staircase going up around them, why she had specified this particular stone for the interior surface of the east wall. Because it's the original material, she said. It was under 3 layers of plaster. The building used it in 1962 and then covered it up. I'm uncovering it. He looked at the exposed stone. Most clients would want something new. Most clients are wrong, she said. New doesn't mean better. It means no one had to think about it. He was quiet for a moment. What you do, he said, is essentially archaeology. Yes, she said, slightly surprised. That's exactly what it is. He nodded, filed it, said nothing more. She thought about that conversation more than was reasonable. She was aware of that. The complications started arriving 5 weeks in, which was, she thought later, almost impressively restrained. The first was a woman named Oh Soo-jin. She arrived at the building site on a Wednesday morning while Vivian was on the second floor reviewing the revised lighting plan with the site foreman. And the way she arrived, the particular confidence of someone who moves through a space as if her right to be there is beyond question, told Vivian something before she even knew who she was looking at. Soo-jin was perhaps 35, beautiful in a way that appeared effortless and was not, with the posture of a woman who has spent a long time being looked at and has made peace with it as a professional asset. She was dressed for a different kind of building, the kind with marble lobbies and ambient lighting. Not for a construction site, but she moved through the materials and equipment with perfect unconcern, which meant she was either careless or very confident in her own authority. She looked at Vivian, the way women look at other women when they are gathering information rapidly and do not want to appear to be doing so. "You're the architect," she said, in English, which meant she had been briefed. "Yes," Vivian said. "Jun Seo mentioned you." A pause, timed precisely. "He mentioned the building, I mean." "Are you here to see the building?" Vivian asked. "I'm here to see him." She smiled. It was a proficient smile, the kind that carried exactly as much warmth as was required by the situation and no more. "We have a history." She said history the way people say it when they mean something specific and want you to know they mean something specific without having to say it out loud. "He's not here," Vivian said. "I can pass a message." "I'll find him myself," Soo-jin said. "I always do." She left. Vivian stood on the second floor of the building with the lighting plan in her hand and a feeling in her chest she spent the rest of the morning refusing to name. That evening, she brought it up. Jun Seo was at his desk when she knocked on the open office door, not the 32nd floor, his secondary office on the 28th, where he spent most of his working hours. He looked up. The expression on his face shifted by nothing visible, but she had been paying attention long enough to catch the almost imperceptible readjustment of someone who was not entirely surprised to see her there. "There was a woman at the site today," Vivian said. "Oh, Soo-jin." "I know," he said. "She said you have a history." "We do." No apology in it, no deflection, just the same flat delivery of fact. "Is she going to be a problem?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "For what?" "For this?" She gestured, all economical gesture that encompassed the space between them, the contract, the entire arrangement. "For the image we're maintaining." "No," he said. "How can you be sure?" "Because I told her 6 months ago that there was nothing between us, and she doesn't accept it, and that's her problem, not mine." Vivian looked at him. At the complete absence of discomfort in him, the steadiness, the refusal to perform contrition about a situation he had not caused. "You should have mentioned this before I signed," she said. "It wouldn't have changed anything," he said. "You don't know that. You wouldn't have let it," he said. "You don't make decisions based on emotional variables." The accuracy of it was infuriating precisely because it was accurate. "I don't like being caught off guard," she said. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. "Is there anything else I should know about?" He considered this with the same deliberate honesty he applied to everything. "Probably," he said. "Nothing I expect to be immediately relevant." "That's not reassuring." "I wasn't trying to reassure you," he said. "I was trying to be accurate." She looked at him for a long moment. "Fine," she said, and left. She was halfway to the elevator when she heard him say, through the open door, without raising his voice, "She's not a threat to you. I want to be precise about that." She stopped. "I'm not threatened," she said, to the hallway. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." She went to the elevator, pressed the button, stood there with the feeling she had refused to name all day sitting in the middle of her chest, and understood, with the cold, clear architectural precision that she applied to load-bearing walls and structural surveys and all the things she built her life around, that the feeling had a name, and she had known what it was since the building site, and she was not going to say it out loud because saying it out loud changed the load-bearing structure of the entire arrangement, and she was not ready for that calculation. Not yet. Not anywhere close to yet. The email from London arrived on a Friday. It came from the executive committee of the Archer International Architecture Prize, a competition she had submitted to 18 months ago, before London, before Sabrina, before the dress and ribbons on the duvet. She had submitted a project she'd designed for a mixed-use cultural complex in East London, a project she was proud of in the precise, unsentimental way she was proud of anything she'd built. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it solved the problem it was given to solve in a way that no one else had thought to try. She had forgotten she had submitted it. The email told her she was a finalist. The awards ceremony was in London, 7 weeks away. Attendance strongly encouraged. She read the email 3 times, standing in the kitchen of her 18th floor apartment with the river going silver in the late afternoon light and the specific sick vertigo of someone who has run very far and very fast and looked up to find the thing she was running from, waiting exactly where she had always known, on some level, it would be. London. She put the phone down on the counter, picked it up, opened a reply window, typed, "Thank you for the notification. I will be unable to attend in person and ask that any representation be managed via." She stopped, deleted it. She stood there for a long time. Then she heard the knock at her door. Junseo did not knock the way most people knocked. He knocked once, a single clean impact, as if knocking twice would imply he wasn't certain he had the right door. She opened it. He looked at her face. Read it in the single, complete way he read everything. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the phone without saying anything. He read the email, handed it back, said nothing for a moment. "You're going," he said. "I haven't decided." "You're going," he said again, and it was not a question or an instruction but a statement of something he appeared to regard as already settled. "It's your work. Your name on a finalist list. You're going." "It's London," she said. "I know where London is." "They'll be there," she said. The first time she had said they to him, out loud, since any of this had begun. It hung in the air between them like a structural problem neither of them had fully measured yet. He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. "They will." She pressed her back against the doorframe, felt the cold metal of it through her shirt. "I can't," she started. "You can," he said, "and you will. Because the person who ran from London did not spend 6 months rebuilding herself from scratch in order to keep running." His voice was level and completely without gentleness, and that was exactly why it worked, because she was not reachable by gentleness right now, only by precision. "The woman who signed that contract doesn't hide." Vivian looked at him, at the way he was looking at her, not with pity, not with concern, but with the clear, direct certainty of someone who has already decided what she is capable of and is simply waiting for her to catch up. She looked down at the phone in her hand, the email on the screen, her name in the subject line, her work in the body of it, her real work, the thing she had made when she was still fully herself before everything collapsed. "If we go," she said carefully, "it would have to be together." "Obviously," he said. "It would be public, in a way the Seoul events haven't been." "I understand." "And you're comfortable with that?" He looked at her with something that might, in a different man, have been impatience. In him it was simply the look of someone who does not consider the question worth the air it takes to ask it. "Book the flights," he said. She looked at him for another moment. At the total absence of hesitation in him, the complete and entirely irrational solidity of him standing in her doorway in the late afternoon light. 2 years, she said. It wasn't clear, even to her, what she meant by it. A reminder. A boundary. A line drawn around something she could feel but couldn't quite name yet, something that was getting larger in the space between them day by day, that neither of them had written a clause for, understood it anyway. 2 years, he said, and said nothing else. And she stood there after he left with the Han River going dark outside, and the phone warm in her hand and the email from London glowing on its screen, and she understood, in the way you understand a structural failure, slowly first and then all at once, that she had made a serious miscalculation, not about London, about him, about what this was becoming, about what it had possibly already become, without her signature, without her consent, without a single clause in the 41 pages she had read at 2 in the morning and signed with the pen she used for drafting. She had told herself she wouldn't fall. He had told her she wouldn't fall. They had both been wrong, and the terrifying thing, the thing that sat in her chest like a load-bearing wall that had just shifted, was that she was no longer sure she wanted to catch herself. She booked the flights that night, not because he told her to. She was precise about that in her own mind. She booked them because they needed to be booked, because the nomination was real, and the work was real, and the woman who had designed that building in East London deserved to stand in the room where it was being recognized, regardless of who else was standing in that room. She booked 2 seats in business class on a direct flight from Incheon to Heathrow, Departure in 6 weeks, and she did it with the same methodical efficiency she brought to all decisions she had already made and simply needed to execute. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, and did not think about Junseo standing in her doorway saying 2 years back to her like a structural echo, like the sound a building makes when it settles. She was getting very good at not thinking about things. The 6 weeks moved the way weeks move when you are simultaneously dreading and needing a fixed point on the horizon, faster than you want them to and not fast enough. She worked. The renovation on the Yongsan building entered its final phase, the interior surfaces coming together in a way that vindicated every decision she had argued for. The stone of the east wall luminous under the new lighting, the repositioned staircase opening the second floor into something that actually breathed. She walked through it on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks before London, and stood in the center of the main space and felt the room the way she always felt a room when she'd gotten it right, as a physical weight settling correctly, everything in the right relationship. The building doing what buildings were supposed to do, which was hold space in a way that made the humans inside it feel, without knowing why, exactly the right size. She took out her phone and photographed it. Not for the portfolio, not yet, just for herself. She sent one of the photographs to Junseo without a caption. He replied 40 minutes later with a single word, "Good." She looked at that word for longer than was necessary. She understood, in significant trouble. The night before the London flight, Oh Soo-jin came back, not to the building site this time. To the lobby of the Yongsan apartment building at 9:30 in the evening, which meant she had gotten past the building's security, a fact that told Vivian several things she filed without examining fully. Vivian was returning from a late dinner with a potential client, still in the clothes she'd worn to the meeting, her coat over her arm, when she came through the glass doors and found Soo-jin standing near the elevator bank with the specific composure of a woman who has been waiting and intends for you to know she was willing to. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Soo-jin said, "I think we should talk." "About what?" Vivian said. Not a question. "About what you're doing here." Soo-jin's voice was controlled. Beautiful, even. The voice of a woman who had learned to weaponize her composure. "About what you think this is." "I know what this is," Vivian said. "Do you?" Soo-jin took a step toward her. Not threatening, just closing the distance to the range where things said couldn't be taken back. "He told you it's business. He tells everyone it's business. He told me that once, and I believed him." She paused. "You seem smarter than I was." Vivian looked at her steadily. The tiredness in her legs from the long dinner and the longer day was a dull physical fact she was aware of and setting aside. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand what you're walking into." Soo-jin's composure had something behind it now. Not anger exactly, more like the pressure of something that has been held at a consistent temperature for too long. He is not a man who does anything without a reason. That contract, whatever he offered you, it isn't what it looks like. "Most things aren't," Vivian said. "His organization is under investigation." The words came out leveled, deliberate, placed like tiles. "Korean Financial Supervisory Service. They've been building a case for 14 months. A legitimate marriage to a foreign national with an established professional profile gives him a layer of credibility that makes the timeline of the investigation much more complicated." The lobby was quiet. Someone moved through from the parking level, didn't look at them, disappeared into the elevator. "You're telling me," Vivian said, keeping her voice very even, "that I'm a legal shield." "I'm telling you that's one possibility." "Why are you telling me this?" Soo-jin held her gaze. Something moved through it. Not the polished composure, but what was underneath it, which was older and less managed and more real. "Because I spent 3 years being useful to him," she said, "and I would like someone else to go in with her eyes open." The elevator arrived. Vivian stood there for a moment. "Good night," she said. She rode up to the 18th floor and stood in her apartment with her coat still over her arm and the city laid out through the windows and Oh Soo-jin's words sitting in her chest like a piece of foreign material that her body was now deciding whether to absorb or reject. A legal shield. She put her coat on the hook, went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink the way she always did when she needed to do something with her hands while her brain worked. She thought about 41 pages of contract language. She thought about the precision of it, the completeness, the way it had read like the work of people who had done this before. She thought about in return for legitimacy, the word he had used, legitimacy, standing at the window of the 34th floor with the city below him. She had taken the word at face value because she was an architect, and she thought in structures, and she had built the framework of this arrangement on foundations she had not fully tested. That was her failure. She recognized it with the cold, specific shame of a professional who should have known better. She went to the floor above. She knocked once. He opened the door in the way of someone who had been awake, which was simply that he opened it without delay, fully dressed, nothing disordered about him. He read her face the way he always did. One complete assessment, then attention, waiting. She walked past him into the apartment. She had been in it twice before, both times briefly, and it was what she had expected, spare, precisely ordered, the furniture chosen for quality without decoration, a room that gave away nothing about the man who lived in it, except that he was someone for whom excess was a form of noise. She turned to face him. "Korean Financial Supervisory Service," she said. She watched his face. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He did not arrange his expression into denial or surprise, which told her everything she needed to know before he said a word. Because innocent men deny and guilty men deflect, and Jun Seo did neither. He simply became, if possible, more still. "Who told you?" he said. "Does it matter?" "It matters for other reasons, not for what you're asking." He moved to the window, stood with his back to the city in the way he stood sometimes, using the glass and the darkness behind it as a wall. "What do you want to know? Is it true?" "The investigation is real," he said. "It's been running for 14 months. The charge framing involves the movement of capital through structures they've characterized as irregular." He paused. "Their characterization is not entirely wrong." The air in the room changed. "And the marriage," Vivian said. "The marriage has value to me for the European expansion," he said. "That's true. It also has value as a stabilizing element in the investigation narrative." He looked at her directly. "Both things are true simultaneously. I didn't lie to you about the first thing. I didn't tell you about the second." "That's the same as lying." "Yes," he said. "It is." She stood very still. Her heartbeat was measured and slow in a way that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with the particular stillness of a person who is deciding which of several available responses they are going to allow themselves. "What happens to me," she said, "if this investigation becomes a prosecution?" "Nothing happens to you. Your involvement is documented as professional and legitimate." "You didn't answer the question." He looked at her. His jaw moved once. "Your name is attached to mine in the public record. Investigators look at people adjacent to targets. You would be required to cooperate, which means they would look at your finances, your communications, your background." A pause. "They would find nothing, because there is nothing." "You decided that for me," she said. "You looked at my life and decided I was clean enough to be useful, and you built the contract around that calculation, and you did not tell me." He said nothing. "I signed something I didn't have the full picture for," she said. "That violates—" "The contract doesn't cover this," he said. "You're right, and I can have it voided, tonight, if you want. I'll call the lawyers and we can—" "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. She stopped, breathed. "Don't offer me the exit as if it resolves what you did." He stood very still. "It doesn't resolve it," he said. "I'm not suggesting it does." "Then what are you suggesting?" "Nothing." His voice was flat. Not defensive, not apologetic, just honest in the stripped, unadorned way of a man who has run out of usable positions. "I made a calculation. I was wrong to make it the way I did. I'm telling you that without qualification." "An apology," she said, "from Kang Jun Seo." "An acknowledgement," he said. "I don't apologize for decisions. I acknowledge when they were wrong." She looked at him. At the containment of him, the total structural integrity of the man, even in a moment where the structure had cracked, which somehow made the crack more visible rather than less. "The building," she said. "The renovation. Was that?" "No." The fastest response he had given. "That was exactly what I told you it was." "How do I know that?" "You don't," he said. "You have to decide whether my word means anything." "Based on what evidence," she said, "given tonight?" He didn't answer. He had no answer for that, and they both knew it. And the silence that sat between them was not the easy silence of the museum or the focused silence of the building site, but something harder, the silence of two people standing on opposite sides of something broken, looking at it. She picked up her bag from where she'd set it down. I'm still going to London, she said. I know. Not for you, not for the image we're maintaining, for my work. I know, he said again. She walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when he said her name. Not Miss Hartwell, just Vivian, the first time. She stopped with her back to him. I should have told you, he said. Not for the contract, for you specifically. You deserve the full structure. She stood there for a moment with his voice behind her and the door handle cold under her palm, and the word deserved landing in the same place. All the significant words landed when he said them, which was somewhere past the walls she had spent 6 months building. She opened the door. Don't use my first name again, she said, until you've earned it. She went back to the 18th floor. She did not sleep. The flight to Heathrow was 11 hours and 20 minutes. They sat on opposite sides of the aisle, which had not been the seating arrangement she had booked, and which she understood he had changed, giving her the distance she hadn't asked for, but that he had correctly determined she needed. He worked through the flight with his laptop and his phone, and the specific focused self-containment of a man who does not require conversation to fill silence. She put her headphones on and looked out the window at the dark over the ocean, and thought about nothing she was willing to look at directly. At some point she slept. She woke up over Europe, gray morning light coming in through the oval window. The landscape below small and green and impossibly familiar. The sight of it did something to her chest that she refused to classify as grief. It was just recognition. The particular quality of English light, the particular color of English green, the country she had left on a rainy Thursday night with a suitcase, and a conviction that she was never coming back. She was coming back. She looked across the aisle. Junseo was asleep, which was the first time she had seen him asleep, which was the first time she had seen his face without the quality of deliberate attention she had come to understand as fundamental to him. Asleep he looked, not younger, not softer, but more like a person and less like an institution. There was a line between his brows even at rest. His hands were folded in his lap with the same precision they always had. He looked like a man who did not fully switch off even in unconsciousness, which she suspected was accurate. She looked at him for longer than she should have. Then she looked back out the window. A legal shield. You deserve the full structure. 2 years. The plane began its descent. London received her with rain, which was appropriate. The Heathrow arrivals hall was bright and loud and smelled of coffee and institutional carpet, the specific smell of transit spaces that exist outside of time, and Vivian moved through it with her carry-on and her coat, and the specific braced tension of someone walking back into a place that had hurt them. The car Junseo had arranged met them outside the terminal. The driver was efficient and silent. The city came into view through the rain-streaked windows. The motorway first, then the outskirts, then gradually the recognizable textures of the London she had left 18 months ago, the streets she had run through and worked in and believed for a decade, were hers. They checked into a hotel in Mayfair, 2 suites on the same floor, a detail managed by Choi before they left Seoul, the kind of logistical precision she had stopped registering as remarkable. Her room was large and quiet, and had windows that looked out over a small square, the trees going green with early spring, the rain making the stone pavement dark. She stood at the window for a long time. Her phone buzzed. A number she had not seen in 8 months. Daniel. She stared at it. The phone buzzed twice, 3 times, stopped. Then a text message. I know you're in London. I'd like to talk. Please. She put the phone face down on the desk, sat on the edge of the bed, stood up, picked up the phone and typed, There is nothing to say. Deleted it. Typed, Don't contact me again. Deleted that. Stared at the screen. There was a knock at the door. Junseo stood in the hallway in a different coat, gray, London appropriate, making him look simultaneously more civilian and more foreign. He had her phone number, she realized, from the contract documentation, which meant he had seen the incoming call, which was impossible, which meant he had simply knocked at this specific moment by coincidence or instinct, and she was not sure which possibility was more unsettling. You look like you're about to make a decision you'll regret, he said. I look like someone who just arrived after 11 hours on a plane, she said. Both, he said. He handed her a coffee, black, the way she always had it, a detail she had never explicitly told him, but that he had simply observed and retained the way he retained everything. She took it. Daniel texted me, she said. I know. She looked at him. Choi monitors public travel databases for names connected to this visit, he said. Yours was flagged alongside a related record. Daniel's name is connected to mine in a travel database? He booked a flight to London 2 days after your nomination was announced publicly, Junso said. Same window, different hotel. The coffee was hot in her hands. She focused on that. He's here for the gala, she said. He's here for you, Junso said, flatly, without inflection. The flat delivery of someone transmitting information they have already processed and set aside. She sat back down on the edge of the bed. The room was very quiet, the rain against the windows, the muffled sound of London below. The investigation, she said. If I'm seen publicly here, if there's press, that's not why I'm here, he said. I know, she said, which surprised her. The ease with which she said it, the certainty of it, which had no rational basis given everything that had happened in the 32nd floor apartment 3 nights ago, but existed in her anyway, structural and immovable. He stood in the doorway of her hotel room in the gray London morning, with his coat and his coffee, and the total self-possession of a man who makes no movement that isn't intentional, and she looked at him and understood, with the specific, devastating clarity of an architect looking at a load-bearing wall she had been pretending wasn't there, that she was not going to survive the next 2 days intact. Not because of Daniel, not because of the gala, not because of the investigation, or the contract, or the 41 pages she had signed at 2 in the morning with graphite still on her hands. Because of the man standing in the doorway. Because of the way she had learned the specific grammar of his silences. Because of the word deserved said in the dark of his apartment, and the word Vivian said at the door, and the fact that she had told him to earn it, and some part of her, the part she had not successfully managed or structured or walled off, was already keeping the count. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was not Daniel. It was an unknown number. London area code. The message was 4 words. We need to meet. S. Sabrina. Vivian's hand went completely still on the phone. Juncio watched her face do something she could not control. The brief, total failure of the composure she had spent 18 months reconstructing. The hairline fracture become a crack, become something structural, the building shifting in the foundation in a way that no amount of load redistribution could quietly correct. What is it? He said. She turned the phone so he could see the screen. He read it, said nothing for a moment. You don't have to respond, he said. I know that. You also don't have to protect yourself from it forever, he said. She looked at him with something that was close to anger and not quite, the way things that are close to anger and not quite are usually something more dangerous. Grief with nowhere to go, or love with no clear target, or the particular rawness of someone who has held it together for long enough that the muscles are giving. What would you know about it? She said. You don't let anyone? No, he said. I don't. The acknowledgement was so clean and so complete and so devoid of self-pity that it stopped her. Then don't advise me on it, she said. Fair, he said. He stepped back from the doorway. The gala is tomorrow at 8, he said. Dinner tonight is optional. Rest if you need it. A pause, the kind that carried something he wasn't going to elaborate on. I'll be on this floor if you need anything. He left. She sat in the quiet of the London hotel room with the rain on the glass and 2 messages on her phone and a coffee. Going cold in her hands and the full weight of everything she had told herself, she was overpressing down on her chest like a structural load she had miscalculated entirely. She had come back to London to collect a prize for her work. She had come back as someone's wife, on paper, in ink, in a contract she now understood had been only partially honest. She had come back with a man she had signed a document promising not to love, and she was losing that particular contractual argument in every room they shared. And now her sister was in this city, and Daniel was in this city. And tomorrow she had to walk into a room full of everyone who had watched her fall apart 18 months ago, and she had to stand there and be exactly the person she had rebuilt herself into, in a foreign city, on foreign ground, in a life that was still half fiction and half architecture and half something she had no word for yet, something that lived in the 18 inches of air between her and a Korean billionaire who had lied to her by omission and apologized without apology and said her name for the first time like it was a word he had been holding in his mouth carefully, making sure not to damage it. Her phone buzzed a 3rd time. Unknown number again. Different one. The message was longer this time. It was not from Sabrina. It was from a name she did not recognize, a Korean name, a woman's name, and the message was in English, precise and cold. You should know that your husband's organization has been under cooperative surveillance by both Korean and British authorities for the past 7 months. Your travel to London has been flagged. You will be contacted by the National Crime Agency within 48 hours. If you cooperate voluntarily, your exposure is manageable. If you wait for them to come to you, it will not be. Vivian, read it once. Read it again. Set the phone face down on the desk with a care that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with the fact that she did not trust her hands. British authorities, 48 hours. Your exposure is manageable. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the rain-gray square below, the trees, the stone, the impossible familiarity of England that had never once in her life felt this foreign. She had signed a contract she didn't have the full picture for. She had flown to London as the legal partner of a man whose organization was under joint international investigation. She had 48 hours before officers of the National Crime Agency knocked on the door of a Mayfair hotel room with her name on the registry. And somewhere in this city, her sister was waiting with 4 words and a question Vivian had been refusing to answer for 18 months. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window. The woman she had been in London, the woman in the cherry blossom wedding and the well-fitted life, and the absolute certainty that she had chosen correctly, was 18 months dead and not coming back. The woman she had built in Seoul was standing at a window in the rain, and she was going to have to decide right now, today, who that woman actually was. Not the contract version, not the survivor version, not the fine version she performed twice a month for her mother. The real version. The version that had signed her name at 2 a.m. and walked into a building half demolished and felt the bones of it and known, immediately, what it needed. The version that had been falling for a man she'd agreed not to fall for and had been writing clauses in her head to justify it for weeks. That version. That was who had to face the next 48 hours. She straightened, pulled back from the glass, picked up the phone. She did not call Junseo. Not yet. Not until she knew what she was going to say, because she had learned, in 10 weeks of watching him operate, that you did not walk into a conversation with that man without knowing your position. She opened Sabrina's message instead, stared at it for a long time, then typed back 4 words. When and where. V sent it before she could reconsider, because the woman who had rebuilt herself from rubble in a 6th-floor apartment in Seoul was not the woman who had run. She was not the woman who had cut the dress and booked the flight and disappeared. She was the woman who had come out the other side of that, different, harder, more structurally sound. And she was not going to keep running, not from Sabrina, not from Daniel, not from 48 Hours and the National Crime Agency, and not from the 32nd floor. She was going to walk into every room that scared her, starting tonight, starting now. Her phone buzzed with Sabrina's reply. An address, a time, and 1 more word beneath it. Please. Vivian put the phone in her pocket, put her coat on, checked the mirror once. Not for vanity, just the brief professional assessment of someone confirming their own structural integrity before entering difficult terrain. She looked fine. She looked like herself. She opened the door and walked out into the London morning, and the rain was cold and real and exactly as relentless as she remembered. The cafe Sabrina had chosen was in Clerkenwell, 20 minutes from the hotel by cab, in a street Vivian did not recognize, which meant it was neutral ground, chosen deliberately, a location with no history between them. She registered that as she paid the driver and stood on the wet pavement looking at the place through the window, small, warm, half empty at 11 in the morning, the kind of cafe that existed in the spaces between London's more recognizable neighborhoods, unremarkable by design. She went in. Sabrina was already there, corner table, facing the door. Another deliberate choice, Vivian noted. The choice of someone who needed to see her coming. She looked different, not older exactly, but changed in the way that a 1.5 years of living with consequences changes a person, which is less about the face and more about the weight behind it. The particular brightness she had always carried, that outward radiating energy, that magnetic need to be noticed, was quieter now, turned down. Not extinguished, but no longer automatic. She was holding a coffee cup with both hands. When she saw Vivian walk in, her grip on the cup tightened, the knuckles going pale. Vivian sat down across from her without taking her coat off. The silence lasted 10 seconds, maybe 15, long enough to be deliberate on both sides. You look well, Sabrina said. Don't, Vivian said. Sabrina closed her mouth. You have something to say, Vivian said. Say it. Sabrina set the cup down. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not dramatically, just the fine motor tremor of someone whose nervous system is working very hard to hold a controlled presentation together. I needed you to know that I know what I did, she said. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm not here to explain it in a way that makes it smaller than it was. I did what I did, and I knew what I was doing, and I did it anyway. She paused. Her jaw was tight. I needed to say that to your face. Not in a letter, not through Mum. To your face. Vivian looked at her. At the sister she had grown up beside, whose clothes she had borrowed and whose secrets she had kept and whose particular way of moving through a room she had watched with a combination of affection and the mild, constant awareness of difference. At the face she had known for 26 years and thought she understood. The baby, Vivian said. Sabrina's breath caught. A girl, she's 4 months. And Daniel, a pause. Something moved through Sabrina's face that was complicated and did not resolve into anything simple. We married in November, she said. It isn't good, but it's what it is. Vivian absorbed that, filed it. I'm not here to discuss Daniel, she said. No, I know. And I'm not going to tell you what I feel about what you did, because it wouldn't give you what you came here for, and it wouldn't give me anything useful. She kept her voice level. Even. The way she had kept it in the kitchen of the London apartment 18 months ago, hands flat on the counter, the world collapsing underneath that particular steadiness. So I'm going to ask you one thing, and I need the truth. Sabrina looked at her. The hazel eyes, their mother's eyes, her own eyes, the genetic accident of shared inheritance, were full in a way that had not spilled yet. Did you know, Vivian said, that he was going to propose to me? A long silence. Yes, Sabrina said. The word dropped into the space between them like something that had been falling for a long time and finally reached the ground. When? Vivian said. 3 weeks before he did it. Sabrina's voice had gone very small. Not performed smallness, actual smallness. The voice of someone telling a truth they have been living with until it became structural, load-bearing, impossible to carry another inch. He told me he was going to propose. He said it was over between us, that it had been a mistake. A breath. I said okay. I told myself okay. And then he asked you and I... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I couldn't watch it. So you kept going, Vivian said. Yes. For 8 more months. Yes. The cafe was quiet around them. A coffee machine ran somewhere behind the counter. Rain against the window. The mundane, indifferent machinery of a normal morning in a city that did not know or care about the conversation happening in its corner. Vivian stood up. Vivian, I heard you, Vivian said. I believe you came here because you needed to say it. I believe the guilt is real. She buttoned her coat. Her hands were steady. She was distantly impressed by that. But I need you to understand something. What you're asking for, the absolution of being forgiven by my face, I can't give you that today. Maybe not ever. And that's not cruelty. That's just the truth. Sabrina was crying now, silent, the way she always cried, the tears running clean and straight. I know, she whispered. Take care of your daughter, Vivian said. She walked out into the rain. She stood on the Clerkenwell pavement for a moment with her coat and the cold and the specific physical sensation of having just done something difficult and irreversible. Her chest hurt. Not the sharp pain of fresh damage, but the deep ache of something old being moved, like a bone that healed wrong being reset. Necessary, real, and nothing she was going to be able to process in the 7 minutes before she needed to be functional again. She flagged a cab, got in, gave the hotel address. Her phone rang before they reached the end of the street. Junseo. She picked up. Where are you? He said. Clerkenwell. On my way back. Why? A pause. The kind of pause she had learned to read as the silence before information she wasn't going to like. The NCA made contact, he said. Not in 48 hours. Now, there's an officer in the hotel lobby. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds, opened them. How long have you known about the British component of this? She said. 3 weeks. Junseo. I was managing it. You were managing it? She repeated, her voice dropping to the register it went to when she was past the point where volume was relevant. You brought me to London knowing British authorities were already engaged, and you managed it without telling me. I didn't want... Don't. The word cut clean. Don't tell me what you didn't want. Tell me what I'm walking into. She heard him breathe. Her name is Detective Inspector Claire Marsh, he said. NCA Financial Crime. She wants a voluntary interview, not an arrest, an interview. There's a difference, and it matters. My legal team is already in the lobby. A pause. She wants to speak to you specifically, without me present. Vivienne watched London move past the taxi windows. The gray sky, the wet streets, the city she had left and come back to, as a different person into a different life, that was currently intersecting with a criminal investigation in a Mayfair hotel lobby. What does she know? Vivienne said. She knows you signed a contract. She knows the terms of the marriage. She knows the registration. He paused. She doesn't know what's real. The phrase landed. She didn't answer that. I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said, and ended the call. Detective Inspector Claire Marsh was a woman of perhaps 50, with the particular economy of movement of someone who has been doing precise work for a long time and has discarded everything that wastes energy. She was sitting in a chair in the hotel's small meeting room. Not the lobby. They had moved to the meeting room, Junseo's lawyers having apparently negotiated the location change. With a notepad and a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She looked up when Vivienne came in and did the rapid professional assessment that Vivienne had learned to recognize in people who were paid to read other people. Two of Junseo's lawyers were in the room. Vivienne looked at them. I'd like to speak with her alone, Vivienne said. One of the lawyers started to object. She looked at him with the specific quality of attention that closes that kind of conversation. Alone, she said. They left. Marsh watched this without expression. Vivienne sat down, took her coat off, set it over the back of the chair. Miss Hartwell, Marsh said. Mrs. Kong, Vivienne said. For the next 14 months, something moved through Marsh's expression. Professional recalibration. Mrs. Kong, she said, you understand you're not obligated to speak with me without... I know what I'm obligated to do, Vivienne said. Ask your questions. Marsh looked at her for a moment, then opened her notepad. When did you first meet Kong Junseo? 7 months ago, in Seoul, at an art museum during a rainstorm. And the marriage. We married after a period of personal relationship. The timeline is what it is. The contract, Marsh said. We have documentation of a formal arrangement predating the marriage registration. You have documentation of a prenuptial agreement outlining financial terms, Vivienne said, which is a document signed by approximately 40% of couples who marry. Is that your evidence? Marsh's expression didn't change. She made a note. Your professional relationship with Mr. Kong predates the marriage, she said. I consulted on an architectural renovation. Yes. Paid consultation. All architectural consultation is paid. That's how professions work. The payment structure was competitive and documented, Vivienne said. You're welcome to request the invoices. Marsh set her pen down. The gesture was deliberate, a shift in register, out of the formal question and answer and into something more direct. Mrs. Kong, she said, I'm going to be straightforward with you because I think you're a straightforward person and I think the situation you're in is more complicated than you were told when you got into it. She paused. Your husband's organization has been moving capital through a network of property development vehicles. Some of those vehicles are registered to names that appear to be legitimate professionals. Architects, accountants, lawyers, people with clean records and established professional credentials whose names provide a layer of respectability to structures that are doing something else. Vivienne kept her face completely still. We're not suggesting you knew, Marsh continued. We're suggesting it's possible your professional involvement, your name, your credentials, your legitimate work, was used as cover for activities you had no part in and no knowledge of. The room was very quiet. And you want me to confirm that, Vivienne said. We want you to cooperate with an investigation that could, if it proceeds without your assistance, result in charges that include peripheral figures who were themselves used without full knowledge. A precise pause. We want to make sure you're not one of those figures. Vivienne looked at the notepad, the tea, the window behind Marsh's shoulder where London rain continued its patient, indifferent fall. She thought about 41 pages of contract. She thought about legitimacy, set at the window of the 34th floor. She thought about the building in Yongsan, the stone of the east wall, the repositioned staircase, the room that breathed when she got it right. She thought about the consulting invoices, the drafting plans, the 20 preliminary sketches on her kitchen floor at 6 in the morning. She thought about what Junseo had said, standing in the half-demolished building with the bad drawings in his hands. I want to know if you see it too. She thought about deserved. She thought about Vivian said once, at a door. My work is my work, she said. The renovation I designed is structurally sound and architecturally honest, and it is mine, from the first sketch to the final specification. If someone has attempted to attach another meaning to it, they did that without my knowledge and without my cooperation. She met Marcia's eyes directly. I will provide you with every document, every drawing, every invoice, every communication related to that project. I will do it today, voluntarily, without subpoena. And when you look at all of it, you will find exactly what I've told you, a building being done correctly by an architect who was given the latitude to do it correctly. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. And your husband, she said. My husband, Vivian said, and felt the words sit differently in her mouth than it had any other time she had said it, heavier, more real, is a man I cannot speak for. I can only speak for my own work, which I'm prepared to do fully and immediately. Another long look. All right, Marsh said. She stood, extended her hand. Vivian shook it. The gala tonight, Marsh said. I intend to attend, Vivian said. I'm a finalist for an award. That's why I'm in London. Yes, Marsh said. I know. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to respect. Good luck. She found Junseo in the corridor outside the meeting room. He was standing with his arms at his sides, his coat on, the same absolute stillness he always had. But there was something underneath it tonight that was not quite stillness, more like stillness being maintained by deliberate effort, the way a structure is still when the load is at its maximum and everything is working at capacity. She walked toward him and stopped 2 feet away and looked at him with everything she had just done sitting in her chest alongside everything she had learned in the last 18 hours. I gave her everything, she said. Every document, every drawing. He said nothing. If your name is on something you shouldn't have put it on, she said, that's your problem to handle. My work is clean and I have told them so. She held his gaze. What I need to know right now, but not for the contract, not for the next 14 months for me, is whether the building was real. The Yongsan building. Whether what you gave me was real. He looked at her. At all of her. The same complete, unhurried look, but this time she could see what it cost him. The effort behind the steadiness, which was the first time she had seen him working to hold something together rather than simply holding it. The building was real, he said. Every commission I've given you has been real. Your work is yours. I would not use your work as something other than what it is. Why not? She said. You used everything else. He absorbed that. Yes, he said. I did. The corridor was empty. Somewhere in the hotel a door closed. The sound of London rain against the upper windows. I need you to understand something, she said, and her voice had a quality it hadn't had with Marsh or with Sabrina. Not controlled, not managed, but unmediated. The real frequency of it coming through without the professional attenuation. I left London because I built a life on foundations I hadn't tested. I signed your contract because the terms were clear and the structure was visible and I thought I understood exactly what I was walking into. She stopped. I was wrong about the structure again, and I need to know if that's going to keep happening. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. That's not good enough. No, he said again, and this time there was something in it that was different. Not the flat delivery of fact, but something that came from further in, something that didn't have the smooth surface of his usual precision. It's not going to keep happening, because I am done managing you instead of telling you the truth. A pause, the shortest. All of it. She held his gaze. Tonight, he said, after the gala, all of it, whatever you want to know. She breathed. Fine, she said. The car is at 7:30, he said. I know. She walked past him toward the elevator. She pressed the button and stood waiting, and she heard him behind her. Not following, just present, the specific weight of him occupying the corridor. Vivienne, he said. She didn't correct him this time. She turned. He looked at her across the corridor. This man who had given her a building and a contract and a city and a lie and the first real work she had done in 6 months. who had looked at her in a gallery with no performance and called it correctly every single time. This man she had agreed not to love, in 41 pages of legal language, on the strength of the assumption that she was a woman who could make that kind of agreement and keep it. "You handled Marsh well," he said. "I know," she said. The elevator opened. She got in. Whoa. The gala was held in a building she recognized, a Victorian civic space in the city, one she had studied as a student for its structural innovations, the way it married industrial materials with classical proportion in a way that should not have worked and absolutely did. Walking into it on Jun Seo's arm at 8:15, beneath the chandelier light and the sound of 200 people in formal wear, she felt the building around her the way she always felt buildings, as a physical argument being made in space, and it steadied her. They stopped. Across the room, through the gap between two groups of people, Daniel Reeves stood with a glass in his hand and his wife beside him. He had not changed. That was the first thing Vivian registered, and it landed with an odd flatness. Not the devastation she might have expected, not the sharp return of old pain, but something smaller and more conclusive. The recognition of a thing that had once been everything and was now simply a person she used to know, standing in a room in a city she had left. He saw her at the same moment. The color went out of his face. His eyes went to Jun Seo, to the hand at the small of her back, to the dress, the posture, the particular quality of untouchable she had not consciously cultivated, but that had arrived at some point in the last 7 months and taken up permanent residence. Sabrina, beside him, also saw her. The four of them looked at each other across a ballroom full of noise and light and other people's conversations, and then Vivian turned away. Not with drama, not with the deliberateness of a gesture, just turned away. Because they were behind her now, architecturally, and she was interested in what was in front. What was in front was her name being called. The Archer International Architecture Prize, in the category of cultural and civic design, goes to. She was not breathing. She became aware of this belatedly. The breath held without decision, the chest locked, the room suddenly very loud and very bright. Vivian Hartwell, for the East London Cultural Complex. The room applauded. She walked to the stage on legs that were steady and hands that were cold and a heart that was doing something loud and disorganized in her chest. She took the award, heavy, real, the specific material reality of a thing that had been given because the work deserved it, and she stood at the podium and looked out at the room. She could see Jun Seo, standing near the back, at the edge of the crowd, watching her with the same attention he had brought to the painting in the museum gallery 7 months ago, when she had been a wet-coated English teacher in a rainstorm who used to be something else. She thought about the building in Seoul, the repositioned staircase, the east wall stone, uncovered from under 3 layers of plaster, luminous under new light. She thought about archaeology. She said what she needed to say. She said it cleanly and without performance, the way she did everything that mattered, and when she finished the room applauded again and she walked back down the steps, and the air in the building felt different, charged with something she couldn't entirely name. She didn't get back to Jun Seo, because Daniel stepped into her path. I was breathing hard, which was the first sign. His jaw was set with the particular tension of a man who has rehearsed something and is now abandoning the script. "Vivian," he said. "Daniel," she said, even, clean. "I need to say, no," she said. "Please, 5 minutes. I'm not asking for anything. I just need to." I said no. She held his gaze. Not with anger, not with the old devastation, not with anything that gave him purchase. "You made your choices. I made mine. There is nothing you can say to me tonight that changes anything, and I am not going to give you 5 minutes of my evening to find that out." He stared at her. "You're different," he said. "Yes," she said. She walked past him, and then the night broke open. She had moved perhaps 10 steps when the sound reached her. Not loud, not dramatic, just the precise sound of a man's voice saying something into a phone with the specific controlled urgency that cuts through ambient noise. One of Jun Seo's security detail near the exit, and something in the quality of his posture sent a signal through her nervous system before her brain had processed the content. She looked for Jun Seo. He wasn't where she had seen him. She turned, scanned the room. The crowd, the chandeliers, the 200 people and their conversations, and then, there. Near the far door, Junseo and two men she did not recognize, one of whom had the bearing of law enforcement, even in a formal suit, the contained authority of a person who has done this before and knows how it ends. Marcia's voice in the meeting room, 48 hours. It had been 6. She was moving before she had decided to move, the award still in her hand, through the crowd, past the noise, toward the far door, and she watched Junseo see her coming and the expression on his face do something she had never seen it do before. Something that was not calculated, not managed, not the product of a man who controls the room he's in. It was the expression of someone who is trying to tell her something without words, across the width of a ballroom, in the 5 seconds before a door closes between them. She covered the last 20 feet at speed and put her hand flat on the door before it shut. The two men looked at her. Junseo looked at her. "Mrs. Kong," said one of the men, with the particular cadence of official identification. "I'm afraid your husband needs to come with us." "On what basis?" she said. "We have a warrant." "Issued by whom? Under what statute?" She kept her voice at the level and temperature of someone who asks questions she expects to be answered. "I want to see the warrant." The man looked at her steadily, produced the document. She read it, every word, her eyes moving across the legal language with the same precision she had brought to 41 pages of contract at 2 in the morning, looking for the load-bearing elements, the places where the structure was strongest and the places where it might fail. She looked up. She looked at Junseo. I was watching her with the full weight of that attention, and she saw what was behind it now, clearly, without the management or the containment. Something that had been building for 7 months in museums and building sites and corridors, and the 60 seconds of a car ride where he had told her she was punishing herself. Something that had grown in the space between a man who said legitimacy and meant more than one thing, and a woman who signed her name at 2 in the morning and meant more than she admitted. He looked at her the way the building had looked at her when she finally got it right, like something coming into its correct relationship with everything around it. "Go back to the hotel," he said quietly. "Don't make statements tonight. Call Hong and the legal team, not Park Hong. And," a pause, the weight of something in it, "don't wait up." "I'll wait," she said. "Vivian, I said I'll wait." She held his gaze. "All of it. Tonight. You promised." He looked at her for one more second. Then he went with the men through the door. And Vivian stood in the doorway of the ballroom with her award in her hand and the sound of the gala behind her and London rain against the glass above. And she understood, with the total structural clarity of a woman who has finally stopped pretending she doesn't know what she's looking at, that she was in love with her husband, on paper, in ink, in a contract that had 14 months left to run. And he was currently being walked out of a London gala by officers of the National Crime Agency. And she had 45 minutes before the night's final act. And everything, the investigation, the gala, Daniel, Sabrina, the building in Seoul, the 41 pages, the word deserved, the word Vivian, the entire architecture of the last 7 months, was about to come down to what happened next. She turned back into the ballroom, picked up her phone, called Hong. Hong picked up on the second ring. She gave him the warrant details in the corridor outside the ballroom, standing against the wall with one hand pressed flat on the wallpaper and her voice at the measured, precise register she used for structural specifications. No excess, no panic, just the information, delivered in the order of its importance. Hong listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions. She answered all 3. "I'll have someone at the station within the hour," he said. "Which station?" she said. "Bishopsgate, most likely. The warrant originates from the City of London jurisdiction." A pause. "Mrs. Kong, this is not an arrest that will hold. The evidentiary threshold for the charges outlined in that warrant is, we've been managing this for 3 months. Tonight is pressure. It's not terminal." "How long will they hold him?" 6 hours maximum before we apply for release, possibly less," she calculated. 6 hours. It was 11:15. That put the earliest possible resolution at 5 in the morning. London gray and cold, and the hotel room waiting. "Thank you," she said, and ended the call. She went back into the ballroom. She did not leave. That was the decision she made standing in the corridor, and it was not a complicated decision. Leaving would mean going to a hotel room to wait alone, which was a form of passivity she had been practicing for 18 months and was finished with. Staying meant finishing what she had come to London to do, which was stand in a room full of people who had watched her fall and let them see what she had built since. She got a drink at the bar, sparkling water. She moved through the room with the award in her hand and the specific quality of presence she had developed somewhere in the last 7 months. Not performed confidence, not the deliberate architecture of appearing fine, but the actual thing, the harder thing, the presence of a woman who has been through the rooms she has been through and is still standing in them. She spoke to 2 other finalists. She spoke to a journalist from an architecture publication who asked her about the East London project with genuine, specific interest, and she answered with equal specificity, talking about the project the way she always talked about work she believed in, without modesty, without deflection, because it did not serve the work to be modest about what it had accomplished. She accepted 2 congratulations from people she didn't know, and one from a former colleague who looked at her with a barely concealed astonishment that she found, if she was honest, quietly satisfying. And through all of it, she was aware, with the steady peripheral attention of a woman managing the load distribution of a complicated structure, of Sabrina and Daniel across the room. They did not approach her again. Daniel spent most of the evening with his back at an angle that suggested he was engaged in conversation while actually monitoring her position, which she registered and set aside as his problem. Sabrina stood beside him with the careful stillness of someone who has said what they needed to say and is now simply existing in the aftermath, which Vivian could respect even if she could not yet soften toward it. At 12:40 she left. Not because she was ready to stop, because she had done everything the room required of her and it was time to go. And there was a difference between those 2 things that she had learned, in the last year and a half, to honor. She walked out into the London night. The rain had stopped. The streets were wet and quiet, the particular post-rain stillness of a city that has been washed and is now resting, the reflections of the streetlights in the pavement long and clean and doubled. She stood on the step of the venue for a moment, the cool air on her face and her neck and the bare skin of her arms, and she breathed it in. The award was heavy in her hands. She took a cab back to the hotel, went to her room, changed out of the gown and into the clothes she wore to building sites, jeans, a wool sweater, boots, because she was not going to wait in formal wear, which would be a kind of costume, and she was done performing. She made tea, sat in the chair by the window, looked out at the square below, the wet pavement, the trees dark and still. She did not sleep. At 4:17 in the morning, her phone rang. She picked it up before the second vibration. "He's being released," Hong said. 20 minutes. "Thank you," she said. She put her coat on, went downstairs. The car brought him back at 4:53. She was waiting in the lobby, not pacing, not performing the waiting, just sitting in one of the low chairs near the entrance with her coat on and her hands in her lap and her eyes on the door. When it opened and he came through, she stood up. He looked tired. It was the first time she had seen him look tired, genuinely, physically tired, the 6-hour erosion of a night in a police station visible in the set of his jaw and the slight looseness around his eyes, and the way he was holding his coat over one arm rather than wearing it, as if the energy required to put it on had not been available. He saw her. Something moved through his face that he didn't manage. She caught it before it closed, a brief unguarded instant of relief, she thought. Not the relief of safety or logistics, but something more personal than that, more specific. The relief of a man who was not certain someone would be there and found that she was. He crossed the lobby, stopped in front of her. She looked at him. "You stayed," he said. "I said I'd wait," she said. "It's 5 in the morning. I know what time it is." He looked at her, the full, complete, unhurried look, and she held it without flinching or deflecting or doing any of the things she had been doing for 7 months to manage the distance between them. "You said all of it," she said. "Tonight, after the gala." "Vivian, you're tired, I know, but you promised, and I have a flight in 7 hours, and I am not getting on that plane without it." She held his gaze. "All of it, now." A long moment. "Upstairs," he said. Manmada coffee. She sat at the table in his suite and watched him do it. The practical, focused movements of a man doing a simple thing with full attention, and something about seeing him in this reduced context, post-arrest, post-gala, 5 in the morning in a London hotel room, was the clearest she had ever seen him, like a building stripped to its structural elements, like the east wall after the plaster came off. He set a cup in front of her, sat across the table, wrapped both hands around his own cup and looked at it for a moment. "The investigation," he said. 14 months ago, the FSS identified a pattern in 3 of my property holding companies. Capital routed through renovation projects to acquisition vehicles that were being used to consolidate position in 3 different markets simultaneously. The pattern was real. The irregularity in their characterization is the source of the funds prior to entry into those vehicles, which I've maintained is within the boundary of legitimate structured finance, and they've maintained is not. He paused. The British component is the European expansion. When I began moving into the London and Frankfurt markets, the NCA flagged the incoming capital as potentially connected to the Korean investigation and opened a parallel file. And the marriage, she said. He met her eyes. The marriage provides documented legitimacy to the international expansion. A Korean national with a foreign spouse who has an established professional profile in architecture. It does change the way the acquisition narrative reads to regulators. He paused. That is true. Say the rest, she said. It is not why I asked you. The room was quiet. Then why? She said. He looked at his coffee cup. In 7 months, she had never seen him look away from a question, and the fact that he did it now, just briefly, just for the duration of one breath, told her the answer before the words came. Because you were standing in front of a painting in my museum, and you said where and corrected yourself, he said. Because you knew the building was bad before I finished handing you the drawings. Because you sat in a car at night and told me Seoul was the first city that came up, and you didn't apologize for how inadequate that answer was. You just let it be true. He looked up. Because you are the most structurally honest person I have met in 15 years of working with people who are paid to be otherwise, and I did not want to let you walk back out into the rain. Vivienne looked at him across the table. You could have told me about the investigation, she said. Yes. You chose not to. Yes. Why? Because I thought you'd walk away. He said it plainly. No performance of vulnerability, no bid for sympathy, just the fact of it, delivered with the same flat honesty he brought to everything. And I wasn't ready for that, which was selfish. I know it was selfish. She sat with that for a moment. The city outside was beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly, the particular pre-dawn London grey she had grown up with. The sky at the moment just before it decides to become morning. The building, she said. Tell me again. The building is yours, he said. Every commission I've given you is clean. Your work is not connected to the investigation in any way that will hold, because there is no connection that is real. I would not use your work as a vehicle for anything else. That is, he stopped, started again. That is separate. Your work is yours. I would not touch it. She heard the distinction he was making between the man who had not told her the full truth about the contract's secondary purpose, and the man who had given her a half-demolished building and stood back and watched her come back to life inside it. She understood that both men were the same man. She was deciding what to do with that. Jun Seo, she said. His name, for the first time, without prefix or formality. He went very still. The investigation, she said. Is it going to resolve? Yes. Hong believes the Korean case will be settled in the next 4 to 6 months through a structured agreement. The British file closes when the Korean case resolves. It's derivative. There is no independent basis for continued UK jurisdiction. He paused. In 4 to 6 months, this is over. And the expansion continues, legally, with documentation that satisfies the regulatory requirements in every market we're entering. He paused. Your consultation work is part of that documentation, legitimately. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer it the way you answered everything else tonight. He waited. In 14 months, she said, when the contract expires. What do you want to happen? The question sat in the air between them like a structural problem finally stated out loud after months of working around it, of redistributing load to avoid it, of pretending the wall wasn't there. He looked at her, at all of her, the jeans and the wool sweater and the building site boots and the award she'd left on the table by the window, the woman who had signed her name in graphite-smudged hands at 2 a.m. and walked into a police interview without lawyers and stood in a London ballroom and accepted an award for work that was hers, completely, regardless of everything else that had happened around it. I want you to stay, he said. Not on paper, not in ink, not because of a document. A pause. Because you want to. She looked at him. That's not a plan, she said. That's a hope. Yes, he said. It is. You don't deal in hopes, she said. You deal in contracts and guarantees and things that are stated precisely. I know, he said. I'm aware of the inconsistency. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. And he saw it, and the corner of his mouth moved in the way it moved when he caught something he wasn't expecting. 14 months is a long time, she said. Yes. A lot can happen in 14 months. It does seem to, he said. She stood up, picked up her coat, picked up the award from the table by the window and held it. The solid weight of it, the material reality of work that had been seen and named. Get some sleep, she said. We have a flight in 6 hours. He looked at her. We. The return tickets are in both our names, she said. It would be a waste of the seat. She walked to the door of the suite, her hand on the handle. Vivienne, he said. She turned. I was still sitting at the table with his coffee cup, and the early London light coming through the window behind him, and the tiredness visible in him in a way it wouldn't be by morning after he'd slept and reassembled. He looked like a man who had been taken apart slightly by the night, and was looking at her from inside that openness before he closed it back up. Thank you, he said, for staying. She looked at him for a moment. Don't thank me yet, she said. You still owe me the full picture, every time, from now on. Yes, he said. I mean it. I know you do, he said. She went back to her room. She set the award on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it in the pale London dawn, and did not try to make sense of the last 24 hours in any organized way, because some structures needed time to settle before you could assess them correctly, and she had learned, if nothing else, to respect that. She slept for 4 hours. She dreamed about the building in Seoul, the east wall, the stone warm under new light. They flew back to Seoul on a Tuesday morning, same arrangement as the outbound flight. Opposite sides of the aisle, the city of London going small beneath the clouds, England disappearing the way it had the first time 18 months ago. Though nothing else about the departure was the same, she watched it go without the grief she had carried out of it the first time. It was just a country, a place she was from, a city that had held a decade of her work and one catastrophic winter, and a sister she was not finished with yet, and an ex-fiancé who was now someone else's husband, and the building she had designed that now had an award attached to its name. It was hers to return to, if she chose, on her own terms. She looked across the aisle. Junseo was asleep again, which was the second time she had seen him asleep, and she thought that was probably a meaningful data point, that he slept on planes, surrendering to the necessary unconsciousness of a man who operated at the capacity he operated at. His face in sleep still had the line between the brows. His hands still folded the same way. She looked out the window. Over Russia, she opened her laptop and started drafting. Not the Yongsan renovation. That was finished, complete, hers. Something new. She had been thinking about a project for weeks, something she had not allowed herself to formally begin because beginning it would mean admitting she was staying, which was an admission she had been managing carefully behind the language of 14-month contracts and financial arrangements. She began now, sketches first, in the margins of the document, the way she always started. Not with the plan, but with the feeling of the space, the question the building was being asked to answer. Then dimensions. Then the first structural considerations, rough and exploratory, the pencil moving the way it had on that first night in Seoul with the Yongsan survey on the kitchen table, the graphite accumulating, the room becoming real in the particular way that rooms became real when she was doing what she was made to do. She worked for 4 hours over the landmass of Asia. When she looked up, Junseo was awake, watching her with the specific quality of attention she had come to understand was not intrusive but was simply how he engaged with things he was interested in. New project? He said. Maybe, she said. He nodded, looked back at whatever he had on his own screen. I want a studio space, she said. In Seoul. Not the building site. A proper studio. With north-facing light. I know a building, he said. Of course you do, she said. 4th floor. The light is good. She looked at him. Have you been holding a studio space for me? He said nothing for a moment. The space has been available for 3 months, he said. I didn't mention it because you hadn't asked. But you knew I would. I thought it was likely, he said, in the careful, precise tone of a man who is trying to be accurate rather than presumptuous, and is aware that the line between the two is narrower than he would prefer. She looked at him for another moment, then turned back to her laptop. I'll look at it Thursday, she said. I'll have Choi arrange access, he said. They flew the rest of the way to Seoul in the working silence that had become, she realized, their natural register. Not empty, not loaded, just two people doing their work in the same space without requiring that space to be narrated. It was, she thought, the best kind of silence, the kind that trusted itself. Seoul received them at 10 in the evening, the city lit and vast and indifferent, and entirely hers in the way that adopted cities are yours, not by birth, not by inheritance, but by the harder claim of having chosen them in a moment of extremity and found them sufficient. She stood in the Incheon arrivals hall with her carry-on and her coat, and the award carefully packed in the main case, and felt the specific quality of returning to a place that had become, without her fully agreeing to it, home. The car took them back to Yongsan-gu. They rode through Seoul at night without speaking, the city going past the windows in its usual density of light and motion, and Vivian looked out at it and thought about the woman who had arrived here 18 months ago on a one-way flight from Heathrow with a wet coat and a signed name and the absolute conviction that she had nothing left to lose. She had been wrong about that too. Having nothing left to lose was its own kind of loss. The building back was harder, less clean, more expensive in ways that were not financial. But the building that came back was load-bearing in ways the original hadn't been, because the original had been built on foundations she hadn't tested, and the current structure had been tested by everything and was still standing. In the lobby, the elevator doors opened and they stepped in. The 17th floor for her, the 32nd for him. She pressed both buttons. The elevator rose. At the 18th floor it stopped. She picked up her carry-on, turned. Thursday, she said. The studio. Thursday, he confirmed. She looked at him in the elevator light. The tiredness of London still on him, fainter now, the specific reconstituted quality of a man who has slept and reassembled but is still, underneath, the version she had seen at the table at 5 in the morning. The open version, the one without the full management on. Junseo, she said. He waited. The hope, she said, that I'd stay, that I'd want to. She held his gaze. I want you to know that it's not outside the range of reasonable outcomes. He looked at her. That's not a commitment, she said. I know. It's an acknowledgement. I know, he said again, and the corner of his mouth moved, the not quite smile, and she felt it the way she always felt it, as a small structural event in the room, a redistribution of something. 14 months, she said. Less now, he said. Approximately 13 and a half. Don't push it, she said. She stepped off the elevator. The doors closed. She stood in the corridor of the 18th floor with her carry-on and her coat, and the city out there through the window at the end of the hall, and she stood there for a moment, just that, stood in it, the specific weight of the life she was living, which was real and complicated and partially contractual, and had cost her more than she had agreed to pay, and given her more than she had thought to ask for. Then she went inside, unpacked the award, set it on the drafting table beside her pencils, opened her laptop, looked at the new project sketches she had made over Russia, picked up a pencil. 4 months later, the Korean Financial Supervisory Service reached a structured settlement with Junseo's legal team. The British file closed 11 days after. No charges, no conviction, a financial agreement that cost him a significant sum and cost him nothing structural in his organization because the organization was, as he had told her, built to sustain the kind of pressure that would have destroyed something less precisely constructed. She was in the studio when he told her, the north-facing 4th-floor studio in the building he had held for 3 months without mentioning it, which had indeed the best light she had worked in since the east-facing corner office in her old London firm. She was at the drafting table with a project spread across it, the largest commission she had taken since Seoul, a mixed-use cultural complex in Busan, a project that had come through her own connections, her own reputation, her own name on her own work. She had 4 people working for her now, an actual firm, small and precise in hers. He came through the door at 6 in the evening. She looked up. It's over, he said. She set the pencil down. All of it, she said. All of it. She looked at him, at the quality of him in the studio light, the early evening soul coming through the north-facing windows, the drafts and drawings on the walls around them, the evidence of 6 months of work that was entirely hers. Sit down, she said. He sat in the second chair, the one she had put there 3 weeks after moving into the studio, when it became clear that he came by frequently and stood, and that standing was inefficient. She looked at her project for a moment. "The contract has 9 months left," she said. "Yes," he said. 9 months is a long time." "We've established it can be," he said. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the full quality of that attention, and she understood, had understood for months, had been working up to understanding since a London hotel room at 5 in the morning, that the attention was not the habit of a man who assessed everything. It was the habit of a man who was specific about what he chose to see, and who had chosen, somewhere in the sequence of museums and rainstorms and demolished buildings and late-night contract reviews, to see her. "The contract," she said. "I want to tear it up." He went still. "Not to leave," she said. "To stop." She held his gaze. "Whatever this is, I want it to be what it is, not what we wrote down what it should be 9 months ago, when neither of us knew." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant departure from—" "I know what it's a departure from," she said. "I wrote half the language myself. I know what we agreed to and why." She paused. "And I'm telling you that the agreement was made by 2 different people than the one sitting in this room right now. And I don't want to spend 9 months living inside someone else's architecture." He looked at her. Something in him settled. The particular settling of a structure that has been carrying a load at maximum capacity and has been given permission to redistribute. She felt it across the room as a physical change in the air. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. She opened the bottom drawer of the drafting table. She had put the contract copy there the week she moved into the studio, a decision she had not examined at the time. She took it out now. 41 pages, held together with the same binder clip as the night she had first read it, slightly worn at the corners now, real in the way of documents that have been lived alongside. She set it on the table between them. They looked at it. "No lawyers," she said. "No witnesses," he said. She took the contract and began to tear it. Not quickly, not with the same speed and force with which she had cut the wedding dress, that other document of a future that had failed. Slowly, page by page, the sound of it clean and specific in the quiet of the studio, each page becoming halves, the halves going into the recycling bin. She kept under the table, the legal language returning to the material it had always been, which was paper, which was nothing, which was never the real structure anyway. The real structure was here, in the room, in the north-facing light and the draft plans on the wall and the man sitting in the second chair who had found her in a rainstorm and given her a building and lied to her once and told her the truth about everything else and looked at her every time as if she were a room he was still learning and intended to keep learning. She tore the last page, set it in the bin, looked at him. "There are things I still need from you," she said. "I know," he said. "The full picture. Every time. Non-negotiable." "Yes. And I need you to understand that this isn't—" She paused, finding the right structural language for it, the way she always did. "I am not a woman who needs to be held up. I've rebuilt myself twice and I know how to do it. What I need is someone who tells me the truth about the weight-bearing elements so I can build correctly." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. Not quickly. With the deliberateness of someone who knows the weight of what they're agreeing to. "Okay," she said. She picked up her pencil, looked at the Busan project. He stayed in the second chair. They worked in the same room until the Seoul evening turned dark outside the north-facing windows, the city lighting up in its nightly way. The Han River somewhere south of them, running its dark and patient course through the center of everything. She drafted and he reviewed quarterly reports, and neither of them needed the silence to be filled, because they had established, over the course of 7 months and 41 pages in 2 countries, and 1 gala, and 1 arrest, and 1 London dawn, that the silence between them was not empty. It was structural. It held things. The best silences always did. 6 months after that, Sabrina's letter arrived. Not a text, not an email. A letter, handwritten, on paper, which was an act of deliberateness that Vivian recognized as intentional. Sabrina had always been someone who understood the weight of gestures, even when she applied that understanding carelessly. This was not careless. She read it at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, alone, with coffee and the city quiet and the award on the drafting table visible through the open door of the studio. The letter was 2 pages. It did not ask for forgiveness, Sabrina had heard her in the Clerkenwell Cafe and had understood. It said, I have been carrying what I did every day for 2 years, and I wanted you to know that. Not for your sympathy, just because I think you deserve to know that it was not nothing to me, what I took from you, even if I couldn't stop myself from taking it. There was a photograph tucked inside. A small girl, perhaps 3 months old, dark-haired, with Sabrina's mouth and something around the eyes that was harder to place. Vivian looked at the photograph for a long time. She thought about what it cost to write a letter like that, to put the specific weight of a specific wrong onto paper without asking for anything in return. She thought about what it cost to be Sabrina, not the version she had allowed herself to hold, the sister who had taken without stopping, but the fuller version, the one who had spent 2 years carrying it, who had come to London to say it to her face, who had found the most honest gesture available to her and made it. She did not forgive her. Not that morning, not entirely, not yet. But she put the letter in the drawer where she kept things she was not finished with, not the recycling bin. The drawer. That was its own kind of answer. She understood that. She told Junseo about it that evening on the terrace. They had developed a habit of the terrace in the evenings. The 32nd floor, the city below, the river. Not always talking, often not, just the shared occupation of that particular view, which was the view she associated now with the beginning of everything, the night he had stood at those windows and offered her an impossible proposition. She told him about the letter simply, without framing. He listened the same way he listened to everything, with full attention, without filling the space before she'd finished. What did you do with it? He said. I kept it, she said. I'm not ready to answer it. I'm not ready not to. He nodded. That's honest, he said. I'm trying, she said. He looked out at the city, the river, the mountains south of it going dark against the sky. She was wrong, he said. What she did was wrong. Yes, Vivian said. And it put you here, he said. Not with satisfaction, with the specific, careful precision of someone stating a fact that contains multiple truths simultaneously, none of which cancel the others. She looked at the city, the Seoul skyline, the specific density of its light, the way it went on in all directions, enormous and various, and entirely indifferent to the small human stories being lived at every point within it. She thought about London, the dress, the flight, the 6th-floor apartment in Mapogu, and the language classes, and the running before dawn, and the specific texture of surviving, which is not the same as living and is not nothing. She thought about a museum in a rainstorm, and a painting of inhabited weight, and a man who said, we're back to her like a question worth answering. Yes, she said. It did. They stood in the dark with the city below them, and the river catching light the way it always did, and she understood. Not for the first time, but more completely than before, with the full structural understanding of a woman who has learned to test her foundations before she builds on them. That the story she had thought was ending in a London kitchen with a pair of scissors and a ruined dress had been nothing of the kind. It had been a demolition, yes, all the wrong things coming down. But demolitions were not endings. They were clearances. The necessary removal of what was not structural, not real, not capable of bearing the actual weight of an actual life. What you built after, that was the story. She had built a firm and a reputation and a city that was hers. She had built a studio with north-facing light and 4 people who trusted her judgment. She had built, slowly and honestly and at real cost, a version of herself that did not require a perfect life to function, because she had learned, in the way you learn things that have been paid for, that the buildings worth standing in were never the ones that had never been tested. And she had built, without a contract, without legal language, without any of the apparatus of formal arrangement, something with the man beside her that she did not have a single precise word for and no longer needed one, because she was an architect, and she understood that the most important structures were the ones that held their shape from the inside, by the quality of their own construction, without needing to be named to stand. The city went on below them. The river ran. She breathed the Seoul night air and felt the terrace floor solid under her feet, and let it be exactly what it was. Enough, more than enough. The beginning it had always been.